Hello, friends, and welcome to the Optimized Advisor Podcast, where we focus on optimizing the well-being and best practices of insurance and financial professionals today. On this show, our objective is to help you optimize your life, optimize your profession, and learn from other optimized advisors. I'm your host, Scott Heinela. We hope you enjoy the show. All right, so Todd, Andy, welcome. Welcome to the Optimized Advisor Podcast. We really appreciate you taking the time with us to hear, to unpack everything college financial planning. It's a true pleasure and an honor. I also have, I would be remiss if I didn't send a thank you to our good friends at APEG, Jeff Henley and Ruth Raftery. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your involvement there, as well as enlighten our audience about the two of you in your organization.
Yeah, sure. Well, let's talk about Ruth and Scott real quick. The relationship between APEG and us started when we began to see their program and think, wow, this is a really great platform for advisors. But the one thing it's missing is college planning. And we approached them and said, what do you think about incorporating college planning into this whole thing? And they were very receptive to the idea, because as you probably well know, there's not a lot out there for advisors when it comes to college planning right now. It's a huge expense, and there's just not a lot going on. And that's kind of the genesis of both Todd and myself getting into college planning. It was probably 15 or so years ago when we were consistently getting that question from our clients who said, hey, Bobby's going off to college next year. What should we do to prepare? And, the last thing they want to hear is, well, you should have saved more and you should have started sooner, because the only bullet in the chamber that most advisors have is savings. And that process has to start, I would say, at birth, optimally, maybe a little bit before birth, because college has gotten so extraordinarily expensive. So Todd and I dove in, tried to figure out what everybody else was doing, and figured out they pretty much weren't doing anything other than maybe looking at 529 programs. And that just wasn't enough. So through that process of exploration, we came up with some courses that we designed, in some cases up to 40 hours of advisor training, and really became by default experts in the field of college planning for advisors. So that's how we got to where we are today.
Thank you, Andy and Todd. Anything to add to that?
No, I mean, he said it. The biggest thing was we had clients coming to us 15, 20 years ago wanting to know what they needed to do, and it was late stage. So there are two types of college planning. One's late stage, and those are the people that have procrastinated, and there's what we call early stage, and those are the people that are getting started when kids are born or toddlers. So there's options for both. One obviously allows us to plan, the other, we got some work to do.
All right, so let's unpack that a little bit and talk about, my first question is, okay, define to me, gentlemen, what is late stage? How old is my child when I'm now I'm going bankrupt and I'm running into the bank to try and get a loan?
Well, yeah, that's unfortunately the process for a lot of folks. What happens, I think, with most parents is they know, as soon as they have a child, they know that if college is on the horizon 18, 19 years from now, that it's going to be really expensive. But as a new parent, there's so many other things to involve yourself with, and it's so far distant that it's a bit like retirement when you're 30 years old. You're really not looking at it too much. But when the microscope kind of focuses in on, college is around the corner, that usually happens in high school, where the high school guidance counselors and the whole process of getting ready for college begins. That's when the GPA starts. That's when the college or the high school counselors are beginning to focus on college. So late stage is generally 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. And, we'd like to think that getting started as a freshman in high school is early, but it's not, because again, this is so daggone expensive. If you've only got 4 years to save, and, when I say it's expensive, there may be a lot of advisors who don't know the real expense of college. If you just did a Google search on something like the total expense, the all-in expense for 1 year of college, the number that you come up with is just north of $36,000 a year. You take that $36,000, multiply it by at least 4 years, because the graduation rate at a lot of colleges is in excess of that. So you multiply it by 4 or 5 years, including an annual inflated cost of about 5 to 7%, and then add in a second or third child in the family, you're talking about a huge number.
Right.
So 4 years to save just isn't enough.
Yeah, I mean, on average, what you're saying is it's minimally $150,000 per child.
Well, I don't
And that's
want to.
a minimum number.
That would be how the math works out. But what we have to understand is that 36,000 is often discounted by either tuition discounting at the college or scholarships, things like that. So that's the sticker price. And believe it or not, the sticker price can be 80,000 or more at
Right.
a lot of colleges. But the out-of-pocket expense, if I were to venture a guess, given an average of 36,000 for the average all-in cost of college, it's probably around 25, 30 grand for a year of school on average across the board. And that's out of pocket.
On average. And then, as you just mentioned, it could be significantly greater than that.
Oh yeah. Again, I don't we all rely on Google? Take a Google search for Harvey Mudd out in California and look at their total cost. It's, like I said, north of 80,000. Todd, do you know if it's one of the most expensive schools?
I mean, within the last year I'd say last year it was the most expensive school.
Wow.
And back to what Andy was talking about. I mean, late stage college planning could honestly include middle school, because if you're thinking you're in high school and you've got 4 years, you've got freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior year. Well, the senior year, the students are completing the FAFSA. So you really don't have the senior year per se, because you're inputting numbers to get your aid even before the senior year is done. So you have the senior year to save per se. But as far as the planning that needs to be done, it needs to be done prior to, or any changes that need to be made need to be done prior to really October, now I guess December. They're saying January 1st of the student's senior year.
Yeah.
So according to ChatGPT,
Now there you go.
You get just testing your level of knowledge. You're absolutely correct. Harvey Mudd College was the most expensive college in the United States, with a total annual cost of $77,339, and that's just education expense, correct? So essentially tuition.
Yeah, a lot of times when you see those numbers, it's just tuition. And when we look at the all-in expense, we're looking at tuition, room and board, books, fees, transportation, maintenance costs. You know, they're really out the door number that sustains a student while they're on campus.
This is a very, very important part of the conversation as it relates to the planning description. And this is where it becomes very, very important as an advisor, and particularly your role in the world that you play in. So let's just start from the beginning. You mentioned 529, but what are the solutions or tools that individuals can use to help them more efficiently prepare for this and be as optimized as possible?
Yeah, it's a great question, but I want to step back one step before that. And that is, how do we make the decision to go to college and what goes into that in the typical circumstance? And I would tell you, if we shopped for cars like we shop for schools, everybody would be driving a Lamborghini, because the process typically is college is around the corner. Where do you want to go? We pick the college that we want to attend, and then we figure out how the heck we're going to pay for it. So that, as you might imagine, is completely backwards. And I shared with you when we first talked that unfortunately college has become a bit of a rite of passage, right? You're in high school, next step, college. Everybody goes. We got to go.
Right.
And the fundamental question that needs to be asked by the advisor to the parents of these college-bound students is, why college? You know, when I ask that question to a lot of my clients, the answer that I get is I don't want to say laughable, but it's just incomplete, and it's very typical of parents. And that's, well, so they can get a degree. And then I have to share with them, you know, there's thousands of students every year that get a degree and live in the basement of their parents' home because they can't find a job.
Right.
So where it all starts is, why college? What are the alternatives? What is our budget? And then begin to formulate, where should we be looking based on the major that's being pursued and all those other things.
Yeah, it is a shame how we've gotten to this almost stigma as it relates to, you know, the question would be like, what's wrong with the vocational school?
Yeah. Oh, the trades
in certain capacities, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the trades and a certain amount of training that's available outside of colleges. And this is going to make it sound like I don't like, or I'm not a big supporter of higher education. I absolutely am. but I am only when we're pursuing it for the right reasons. Look, again, as an advisor, one of the biggest concerns that Todd and I have is the impact that this has on our clients' financial future, retirement. And there's been numerous studies, and I don't know who did these. I think one was a Pew Research study that asked parents of college-bound students, what's the biggest concern you have with respect to your retirement? And almost every time they say the cost of college. How much should we commit to college versus how much should we commit to retirement? And the problem is it's an emotional decision for parents. Right. They don't want to feel like they're shortchanging their kid by not contributing everything they can. And again, the statistics suggest that 77% of kids that go to college are getting it funded by their parents. So we know it has a huge impact. And every dollar that's spent is probably 3 or 4 that we don't have in retirement. And that's, again, a very early conversation that advisors should have with the parents of these college-bound students. How much are we willing to commit?
Not to unpack this in great detail, but in our household in particular is also this question of the state of university today, and the culture and everything that goes with being a part of a university today, where if you go back 50, 60, 70 years, university was where higher education was, and open communication and debate and dialogue was supported. It was fostered. It was where it's the genesis of our country's debate and disagreement. And so even more today, that is so far removed, and there has to be, I think, some conversation for parents and consulting going on of okay, if the answer is yes, university, then what is the right university as well?
Yeah, no, it's, you brought it up earlier, Chat GPT, right?
I did.
What you realize is that back in the early days of college, and by the way, 4 years is not a magical number. It was established because they needed to come up with a way to pay professors, not because the amount of information for a degree could be dispensed within 4 years. It's a little bit of a twisted story to figure out why 4 years. And
it's interesting. It circles back to money and following the money. I wonder how that is.
And I'd invite your listeners to do some research on that. It's kind of an interesting story how we wound up with a 4-year degree, because I've always thought, it's crazy that it takes exactly 4 years to become a landscape architect, a secondary teacher, and you name the profession that offers a 4-year degree. It's just kind of crazy. And then you consider things like Chat GPT. Well, if it takes 4 years to effectively transfer all this information, then we look at how quickly information becomes obsolete. My goodness, what you've learned in freshman year was probably obsolete by the time you moved into your sophomore year.
Great point.
So you start thinking about things like this. And again, it's not to discount the value here, but the evolution of the education system is glacial in its speed. And it's for good reason. These institutions are made of big money. And Todd's got the numbers on some of these endowment funds, but they don't want to change. They've got an environment right here where they can charge what they want. And the government says, hey, parents, if you can't afford college, we've got a parent loan out here for you. And if you can fog a mirror, you can probably borrow whatever. If you need $80,000 to go to Harvey Mudd, we'll probably wind up giving that to you. They'll let you dig the hole as deep as you want. And the universities are almost unrestrained in what they ask because the government is standing behind them with a guaranteed loan.
Right. Interesting. There's been a lot of conversation I've had over the last few years as it relates to the universities. At the end of the day, they are a business. And so there's this conversation or question around that you can negotiate tuition. True or false?
Go ahead, Todd.
No, well, you can't negotiate tuition per se, but we always trained our advisors that we put through our training sessions that you never use the word negotiate with a guidance counselor or an admissions professional at a college. You're always asking them to use their professional judgment, because as soon as you instigate or initiate the word negotiate, that puts you in a power position. They get defensive, and then all bets are off. So we're always asking them if they could reassess. And I will tell you personally, I've got one son that went to a state university. He's now graduated, fortunately, full-time employed and off the payroll. I've got my next two kids are in private schools. They're both collegiate athletes, but we've done a lot of back and forth. And I think the things that we educate our parents on, especially our clients, and then even the advisors we work with, is there's a huge opportunity for parents to go back to schools and say, you know what, is there any additional money available? They're actually looking for that. So what we call those, and both and my oldest two boys, we actually secured anywhere. I think the average was somewhere between $6,000 and $12,000 for both of them on an annual basis, where we went back to the school. And what happens is on May 1st, that is the day that most students have to commit to a particular university. Now with COVID, some schools have extended that to June 1st, some even to July 1st. But for the most part, that May 1st deadline is when schools want to know whether you're attending or not. Well, all of those students prior to May 1st have been awarded some type of aid, right? So they've been awarded a loan, they've been awarded a scholarship, some type of grant. If my student who was set to attend XYZ University all of a sudden on April 29th or May 1st says, you know what, I'm going to ABC University instead, the funds that were allocated to my student now become available again at the university. So what I've had my boys do, we call them second chance awards. So I've asked my boys, go back to the universities, go back to the department chair of the degree you're getting, as well as the financial aid office, and ask them, are there any additional monies available for a marketing student or an engineering student that you might have that I would qualify for? And we can start in financial aid, but I also educate my clients on going back and having their students meet with the department chairs. If a student, a freshman student, goes back and sits down with the department chair is getting to know that student. They're saying, wow, I have this 17, 18-year-old student in front of me who thinks it's important enough to schedule a meeting with me, sit down with me, talk about how they want to make sure they're taking care of their parents and they're doing everything they can to reduce the cost. As an educator, as a department chair, I'm looking at that student saying, this is the type of student I want in my department. Mm-hmm. What can I do to help that student? And in both cases, for my two oldest boys, that department chair went back to the financial aid office and said, I know we got this money over here. Can we allocate it to this Kelly boy? And like I said, we got anywhere between $6,000 and $12,000 between those two kids, my two oldest kids. And this is free money. So I know we haven't talked about that. There's two types of financial aid. There's free money and what we call self-help, which is loans, work study, stuff that you literally have to pay back. Free money, grants, scholarships, stuff you never have to repay. All of the second chance money that both my boys got were free money, stuff we never have to pay back. Reduces the cost of college right off the top, dollar for dollar. So to your point, it's not necessarily the sticker price itself isn't negotiable, but the actual cost that you're going to pay absolutely is negotiable. And really it starts with, we talked about this a little bit earlier, it really starts with college selection, being able to select the right college that in turn gives the most amount of financial aid as far as the free money is concerned.
Okay. And negotiate, that's a dirty word.
Yes. Yeah.
we want to articulate that more diplomatically.
Right. I think the diplomatic synonym for that would be leverage. And we do encourage leverage. And that's why a lot of times we'll have a student, we'll recommend that a student apply to a number of colleges, because what we know is that there are what we call buyer colleges and seller colleges. The seller colleges, they don't need to worry about the number of applicants they have. They don't need to give away money to attract students. The buyer colleges, however, they're willing to dole out scholarships and tuition discounts to get the student. So if we're applying to a buyer college and we want to get into the seller college, we can take the award that we got from the one and say, look, this is what it's going to cost me to go to that school. Is there anything you can do to help even the playing field here? So it's leverage.
Interesting. I'm going to come back to that. I've got a bunch of questions. This is great. So Todd, Andy, so let's unpack that a little bit. Can we talk a little bit more about the state of scholarships and grants?
Sure. Yeah, I would say that, it's really interesting. Through COVID and all the remote learning that we saw, we were anticipating a reduction of tuition because all these parents were realizing, wow, we don't need all these, brick buildings and ivy covered walls they're doing it presumably successfully through the internet. So we thought tuition would come down, and as a result, the scholarships and awards would probably go down as well. Well, what we saw was immediately after COVID and during COVID, tuition rates were going up.
Wow.
Believe it or not, they were finding a way to charge more, and that goes back to what I said earlier. It's almost unrestrained what they ask for. So, in it, the impact on scholarships is that they remain. And they are more a function of the long-term endowment funds that colleges have, which are very resilient to ups and downs in the market because they're invested relatively conservatively. So we find that historically, there's going to be very similar picture from one year to the next in terms of the amount of money that becomes available to give to the students.
Well, and what type of scholarships? Because, I would say, typically speaking, the layman is going to think athletic scholarships, and that's not the case. I mean, exclusively, that there are significantly other and more scholarships available to students. This is a question than just athletic scholarships.
Yeah, so athletic scholarships can be a big part, right? There are numerous sports, whether it's men or women, that are full ride scholarships. And just to clarify, that full ride means they're getting full tuition. But there are a limited number of sports. You hear like soccer players say they got a full ride. It's very highly unlikely that a soccer player got a full ride because they're limited in the total number of scholarships for their programs. But, there's NAIA schools that many people aren't familiar with that have athletic scholarships that are comparable to a D1 school or a D2 school. D3 is the only school, Division III schools are the only ones that don't give athletic scholarships. But to your point, in addition to the athletic scholarships, it's what's called merit scholarships. So that merit scholarship could be based on a GPA, could be based on test scores. A lot of schools are going test optional, but a lot also, you can go straight to their website. They make no secrets about it anymore. They will literally list on their website, if you have a GPA of 4.0 or 3.5 to 3.8, we're going to give you $8,000. If you have a 4.0 on a weighted scale, we're going to give you $10,000. If you score a 30 on your ACT, we're going to give you $20,000. So they're very transparent. There's not as much, I'll use the word negotiation, but there's not as much negotiation with them on those type of scholarships. That's why it's really important to go back and ask for those additional ones after they're released from those students that aren't coming back, because anymore, you're not really getting extra ones. What you're asking for is, is there an excellent scholar? Like one of my boys gets a presidential excellence scholarship, but what that is simply based on is his community service. What type of things did he do in the community? And they'll ask for that. They'll say, well, did you, if you're asking for more money, we've given you the max academic, the max merit. Are there any other things you did in the community? And, your boy or your student, the client student, can list those. And if the school deems it was worthy of their scholarship, for one of my boys, it was $2,000 a year for a presidential excellence scholarship, just because he helped out and volunteered at numerous different places. So I think people would be shocked at the amount of money that's available if they're willing to look for it. And it does require work, right? I'm asking my boys specifically to call the schools themselves. Schools don't want to hear from parents. If schools had $5 for every time a parent called and said, I can't afford this, we need more money, they wouldn't have to call, they wouldn't have to charge for tuition. But when a 17 or 18-year-old young man or young woman is calling, that to them, that's a sign of a mature, disciplined young person who cares about their education, cares about their family, their parents, trying to do what's best. Those are the type of students all of these colleges and universities want as their student body. So the student has to be the one that does it. And, I know Andy does it as well, but I've coached my clients' kids on what to say, how to say it to a admissions counselor, a financial aid director. And when I encourage the student to go in, mom and dad can go. Mom and dad can go with them to the meeting, but I tell mom and dad, you're only allowed to go if you're able to keep your mouth shut. Because when you're in that meeting, the only one that should be talking is the student.
Yeah, that's great. That's invaluable input. Okay, so what about grants, and how do they differentiate from scholarships? And then can we move on to the the options in terms of financing, funding, how I save for this, if from an efficient standpoint?
So grants aren't much different than scholarships in the sense that they're both considered free money. So when we say free money, that means a grant or scholarship that's been awarded to a student is dollar for dollar reduction on their cost at the school. It's money that mom and dad or the family or the student never have to repay. And those grants can come from state grants. They can be federal grants that are provided. Some of those are need-based, so they're based on a family's income or assets. And then some of those are also, donations, or like Andy mentioned, the endowment. So you might have a local business, and one of my boys got one of these too. It's the Wood Family Scholarship, and what it is was what athlete during the year showed or exemplified their faith. He goes to a faith-based school, exemplified their faith throughout the year to another university, and he did that, and it's a $1,200 scholarship. So that is a grant, or it's not really a scholarship. It's a grant from that family that they provide to an athlete at the school for demonstrating a particular thing. So,
and student can stack as many of these that they qualify for and that the school would approve, as many as possible, correct? So I
as long as they're not need-based. So some schools will allow you to stack awards. Some schools will only allow you to stack awards up to what the federal government believes you're eligible for. So that when I was talking about college selection before, you've brought up a good point. This is one of the other things that you want to look for. You certainly want to look for schools that will allow you to stack awards on top of each other and potentially exceed what the federal government believes you can pay.
There's a lot of information here. People need a consultant like you.
We think they do.
They need a coach. This is too important. There's too much money at stake, both spent and saved or retained. To not, I would say, to go this alone.
It is.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, Todd and I often try to put things in terms that parents understand. And if your child comes home and they got a 95% on a test, you think, wow, that's great. That's an A. They're doing really good. And if you're looking at $170,000 out-of-pocket expense, and you get this whole process 95% right, that 5% error is costing you big money when multiplied over 4 years and 2 kids. So we tell you got to get it 100% right. You have to fire on all cylinders. You have to be aware of all of the opportunities that exist to reduce the out-of-pocket expense, not just to maximize the return on your saving, because that just is not going to work.
That is, it's funny because that's exactly where I was going to go. And I'll take it one step further. Most college planning fees, for an advisor, especially if they're a good one, what you're going to pay is such a minuscule amount of the overall cost of college that, to Andy's point, to pay that minuscule amount to make sure that you get it 99 to 100% right, you should save your fee back from that advisor over, more than 5, 6, 7, even 10 times or more over what you're paying. So,
yeah. Okay. Is now a good time to transition to the savings options, how I really prepare for this from a financial perspective?
Yeah, sure. Well, the go-to for most advisors is the 529. And
correct.
Unfortunately, we've been coached into believing this is a 529 savings plan, college savings plan. You've heard that term, right?
Yes, absolutely.
That's a marketing term.
I have one, which
well,
I think I thought or think I'm doing the right thing.
Well, yeah. And so do most advisors. And
I imagine the answer is possibly.
Possibly. Yeah, possibly. Yeah. We're not going to say they're bad, but this tidbit might be, well, Todd and I are going to reveal ourselves a little bit as longtime college planners. One of the things that we rarely, if ever, use are 529s. And that may be a big surprise because that's the go-to for every.
How can you say such a thing?
So here we go. Let's talk about the 529 first. First off, it's an IRS designated plan, just like a 401k. It's a 529, right? It comes from paragraph in section 529. It is a qualified tuition program. That's its real title. If somebody were to say, hey, I've got an IRS qualified program for you, the hairs on your neck are going to stand up. Yeah, that sounds ugly. So we paid a bunch of marketers and they figured out, hey, what terms do parents like? Oh, they like savings and they like plans. So we're going to call this a college savings plan. And I can't tell you how many times, especially in a down market, we have parents come in to talk with us first time and they say, well, I've got this 529 thing and it has less in it now than it did when I put all my money into it. What happened? Well, the returns aren't guaranteed. And I used to do this evaluation on 529s periodically. And last year I did it to find out what 529 performed the best. And it was interestingly Ohio, where we're from. And I looked at the results. And I think any advisor who looks at the results of 529s coupled with the costs and net return, they're going to say, dang, I can do better than that. And so you have to rely on what are the other benefits of 529s. Well, in some cases, you can get a state tax deduction for your contribution. You get growth that's unencumbered by federal tax. So there are some benefits. But if you don't get growth, that's out the door, you know? And the benefit, the tax, it's like, why would you let the tax tail wag the dog? You've heard that expression. And the 529s, to some degree, have that. And from my perspective, and again, Todd, I think, shares this perspective, a lot of 529s are invested, if you will, in an age-based model. In other words, the glide path.
Correct. That's mostly what I've seen.
Yeah, they trend towards
it's
zero.
It's just this kind of set it, forget it.
Right. You know. So let's consider again some of the statistics of 529s. Most parents get into those, really dive into their contributions when a student is how old? At birth? No, it's closer to 12 to 13 years old. Their glide path in an age-based model begins getting into almost fixed returns at about that same time.
Right, because at the time they're entering into their savings program within the 529, the child is that much closer to, let's call it, the maturity age of going to university. Thereby, the portfolio is going to be more risk averse.
Right. Exactly. And we're kind of throwing.
You're also more vulnerable to sequence of returns risk, not for today, but definitely vulnerable to that as well. The closer I am to my child needing to draw from the piggy bank, there's a lot more exposure.
Exactly.
So there lies your problem, because at age 12, you're 5 or 6 years away from college. It's no different than those age-based plans for retirement plans. You get 5 or 6 years away from where you're going to be. Those age-based plans have already started pushing money to bonds. And heaven forbid, we're in a rising interest rate market. We know that bonds have an inverse relationship to interest rates. So as interest rates rise, bonds go down. So you have a bunch of people who think they're going to make good money because they've been told bonds are safe, only to find out, to Andy's point, we got people coming in going, I have no idea why my portfolio is losing money. Or my 529 is losing money. Well, it's losing money because it's in bonds that are losing money, and they didn't think they could lose money in bonds. Because that's not what they were told. So it's a really bad situation for a lot of families and a lot of advisors who are unaware that not only is that 529 losing money if it's in an age-based plan versus actively managed or invested, but on top of that, a 529 literally has a propensity to reduce any aid that you may get dollar for dollar. So any financial aid you may have otherwise qualified for, a 529 plan could reduce that.
Yeah. Other options, typical options, because the federal government, again, I say tongue in cheek in their infinite wisdom, you can borrow from retirement funds to pay for college, right? And there's no penalty. You can use a Roth and set it up for the kid and contribute to that and use it for college, and there's no penalty. Well, those are great things, but then you're destroying the opportunity to save for retirement. You're robbing Peter to pay Paul. And I don't know about your audience, but how many times do we see a client who just has no worries with respect to how well funded their retirement is?
Right.
So now we're going to say borrow from it to pay for college? And it doesn't make any sense, but those options exist. We've seen people attack home equity to pay for college. And again, you're creating a problem there because you still have to pay it back, or you're still creating a void in your overall plan that otherwise might be avoidable. Rental property on campus, believe it or not, that can be a good one, but it's a management headache. And, it has a lot of other maintenance issues that go along with it. So it can be effective when you're housing your student off campus and they are the property manager. And, as a business, you may have some write-offs. The student may be earning some money that could be attributed to college, depending on how their financial aid eligibility works out. So that's an option. The one that I think probably a lot of advisors have heard of and then do this, I'm not going to touch that one, cash value life insurance. And it's interesting here because cash value life insurance as a funding tool for college got, and I will say deserved, a bad reputation because the way it was handled by a lot of very aggressive insurance producers who just wanted to sell an insurance policy and make a bunch of money. But if we looked at how a cash value policy should be structured to maximize cash accumulation, minimize death benefit, we could be killing a number of birds with one stone. Todd and I start out in our conversation with parents a lot of times asking them the question, if you were to die as a parent, would you want your child to continue the college dream? And if so, which of these two options would you want? Would you want them to go in debt? Or alternatively, they don't go in debt, but they just don't go anymore. They drop out. Which one of those alternatives do you like? And they say, well, we want them to go. Okay, then how are they going to go without incurring this debt? Well, it can be life insurance. So for that reason, we always have that conversation up front. Are you covered well enough to cover all the expenses, including paying for college, if that's what you really want to have happen? And then we segue into, if that's the case, we may be able to create a savings tool for you that uses cash value life insurance and accomplishes a number of goals for you. And again, access to that cash can be income tax free if it's, again, set up properly. So don't want to dive too far into that, but that's one of the alternatives.
No, but that's very helpful. I mean, as you gentlemen both know, our core business is risk management solutions that include annuities, life, and long-term care. Yeah. However, and all of that with that. So clearly we're proponents. With that said, it is the right fit in the right place. And exactly. I couldn't agree more with the sense that, and all too often, agents or advisors are ill-equipped and trying to just bridge a quick gap and looking for a solution. They're ill-equipped. They're not experienced enough to be dealing with the right product placement and the strategies that go along with finding the right cash value life insurance. So if we can, just from a high level standpoint, reiterate some of the key features that should be included in any cash value life insurance solution as it relates to college planning. One of them would be liquidity, I would presume.
Absolutely.
One of them would be guarantees.
Yep.
What are the guarantees? Right? So if you can, from your perspective, I don't want to put words in your mouth, just reiterate some of the high level takeaways and key features that we would want to be very, very cognizant of.
And Todd, I expect you to chime in here, but the focus has to be on the cash accumulation versus the death benefit. As you know, I mean, every dollar that you put into a life insurance policy has to go one or two directions: death benefit or cash accumulation. I will tell you that the modified endowment contract limits we like to avoid, but I will also tell you it's not the mean animal in the corner that we all think we have to avoid. We can use MECs very successfully in the college planning process. So, a MEC or not, we can usually deal with it.
Thank you for stating that.
Yeah, sure.
It's very important that anybody utilizing cash value life insurance is aware of that. A MEC does not necessarily mean it's the devil or a dirty word.
Yeah, it's very interesting though. You can talk to a lot of insurance companies inside the insurance company, and when Todd and I create things, sometimes they'll call us, "Oh, this is going to be a MEC. Are you sure you want to do this?" So even inside the insurance companies, they don't know what they're dealing with or the power of
Correct.
these tools that they have. But nonetheless, so cash accumulation is key. Who we insure is another element. Typically, it's one of the parents, but solutions exist where we can insure a grandparent, a student. There's a lot of opportunities if there's a problem getting the preferred person insured.
So hold on a minute. Let's unpack that for a moment, because age and health become a major driver of how productive that asset or that tool is going to be. Where if we're old, unhealthy, that's going to be very prohibitive.
Yes, if we wind up with a tabled individual, it's probably not going to be the solution that we recommend unless there's an alternative insurable, and that's going to be, like I said, a parent. It can be the student. Understand that the student is taking on potentially loans that need to be paid off at some point. So there is some ability, and we've eclipsed what would normally be approved at insurance companies for the insurance amount of a student, because we formulated simply that, again, we're stepping into this $170,000 expense that the student at some point is going to be responsible to pay back.
Mm-hmm.
So how do they do that? Well, if we've got a life insurance, and again, this is, the whole life insurance thing, there's so many reasons to consider it. But nonetheless, the insurability factor is definitely one. We want to make sure that we've got the cash accumulation in there that we want.
Got it.
So we'll have to look for a different solution if there isn't an alternative insured. Todd, other characteristics that you can think of?
Well, we're using the acronym of LUC a lot, LUC, liquidity, which we've already talked about. Use, what's the use of the money? I think the flexibility that a whole life or a permanent life policy provides, if you save a bunch of money, let's say inside this life insurance policy, and let's say your student doesn't go to college, you've got money in a 529. If your student doesn't go to college, you can save that and use it for another student. If you don't have another student, it really reverts to being an IRA. Again, something that has penalties and stuff for you to get to it prior to retirement age. So I would tell you, you have some limits with that, some penalties per se, where in a life insurance policy, I can save tens of thousands of dollars if my student doesn't go to school. My student can use that for something else. I can let them borrow money from that to put a down payment on a house and pay me back or pay the policy back. So, it is a banking tool. I know there's a, call it family banking. There's a bunch of people doing that. Nelson Nash started it. There's a bunch of people now that are doing that with this family banking idea. I have one. We use it. My wife and I have bought cars using our permanent life insurance policy. We paid for some of our kids' college education versus borrowing from the federal government to do it. So the liquidity, the use, how are you going to use it, and the ability to use it for different things without penalty, I think is big. And the last part of luck is C, which is control. And I think, if you're in a 529, you really don't have control. You have either an advisor that's managing that, or you're really in deference of the investments that you're in. You have no control over how those investments perform. In a life insurance policy, it is very predictable, right? You're going to get the fixed amount that's guaranteed, the return that's guaranteed inside the policy. You have guaranteed values. And then on top of that, you have paid up additions if it's set up right. So there are those quote unquote paid up addition dividends that we like to call them that you get on top of the inside guaranteed rate. But you have the liquidity in that policy. You have use of the money to use however you like, and you basically are in control. No one can prevent you from getting your money. Andy mentioned home equity lines. I can't tell you the number of clients, and this doesn't necessarily relate to college, but the number of clients that are retired who didn't listen to me when I told them to do it before they retired, but who have their house paid off. But they didn't go get the home equity line open before they retired. And they're like, well, I've got this $500,000 asset of a home. I'm going to borrow some money from it. They go to the bank because they say, well, it's my home. I own it. I own the money. It's my money. And the bank says, wait, you're not working? Well, we can't. You don't qualify for a loan. So, they don't have control of that $500,000 asset because they have no bank that's willing to even create a HELOC for them because they have no income.
Right. Well said.
One more characteristic of the policy is participating versus non-participating loans, because loans can be a feature that can be very effectively used on a properly structured insurance contract. And the participating loans, obviously, when a parent pulls out money to use for college, it's a loan from the insurance company. All their money is still inside the policy, participating in the dividends and interest growth. So participating loans is what we'd like to see in a policy as well.
And today, right, interest rates have come a little way in the last few months.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, be careful what you ask for. We've been asking for it for well over a decade in terms of savings rates. We now have it, and it's creating challenges in our industry as a whole. But to that point, so some policy loans are as low as 1 or 2% or a net zero. So there are opportunities to create some level of arbitrage conservatively. I'm going to reiterate conservatively in today's environment as well. And those are things to certainly be aware of.
Yeah, and I think your advisors have enough of an understanding of how these products work to be able to accomplish that goal.
So what about, I think it's one of the last items, maybe last but certainly not least, is these prepaid programs that certain states or counties may offer, where I can prepay the tuition. I lock in the tuition rate at the time I prepay. What are the pros and cons of that? First of all, I guess, do they still exist?
Well, I'll let Andy he can comment on this as well, but I would say the pros are, if you live in a state that still has one, good for you, because most of them have gone bankrupt. What was happening was they couldn't make the money they were collecting grow fast enough to keep up with rising tuition. And Andy talked about that in the beginning. I mean, even with COVID, we've demonstrated that we don't have to sit in a classroom. Now, I might argue that I still think there's tremendous value being in a classroom with other students and learning from a professor versus trying to learn online. I would argue that a lot of my kids who were still in high school during COVID really are behind in some areas because of the dynamic of trying to learn from home. I don't think our students were prepared to do that. I think we did a good job of getting through it, but let's not make a mistake and say that our kids haven't been set back because of it, because I believe my kids have. But with that being said, again, the
prepaid tuition,
the prepaid, the idea that they couldn't keep up with the rising cost of college, that was something that probably was never going to happen, because especially now with the government considering paying off those student loans. Andy mentioned it earlier. The issue you have there, I mean, it's basically an open book for the universities to say, well, if you've got a government that's going to bail you out, we can charge whatever we want. So it's going to create an even bigger problem down the road. And certainly I would be shocked if any of these prepaid plans are able to even stay viable. I know Ohio's isn't. I don't know how many others in neighboring states around us still are, but the advisors that I talk to, there's not many states that still have those that are functioning.
And I think there's also a separation, and then you could chime in, Andy, between state programs and then which we haven't talked a lot about, but also private universities or private colleges.
Yeah, and your original question was, believe it or not, twofold. You may not have realized that, but the prepaid tuition programs, as Todd mentioned, going extinct. But the plans that are offered by both public and private, or public and private schools, a lot of them now offer a fixed tuition at the rate that you get when your student is a freshman. So they'll typically promise you that whatever the rate is today, if you get in, we'll honor that rate for the next 4 years. And they usually cap it at 4 years. Sometimes some schools will also include room and board, but there are elements like books and fees and all that kind of stuff that aren't counted there. I think the Ohio State University in Columbus, I think Todd, do you know, do they still adhere to the tuition lock?
I don't know if they do or not. I know that the last I checked, this was last year, Kent State did.
Okay.
I'm not sure if Ohio State still does, but they might.
So my takeaway there is that it's very university or college to college dependent, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah. And they're always trying to come up with ways to keep a student. I mean, student attrition is a factor for a lot of colleges. A student drops out, never comes back. That costs the university money. So they're trying to throw things in to entice students to stay longer. And a lot of them have a 4-year graduation guarantee. They've even got some schools that offer a master's program at no cost if the student isn't employed by the time they get their undergraduate degree. So, and there's a lot of factors that go into qualifying for those types of programs.
How do I figure all this information out? I mean, it's so overwhelming.
It is. And, as we said at the outset, without the right coaching, without the right knowledge of everything that exists, it's a daunting, if not impossible, task to make it through successfully. Todd and I, can I plug anything here? I don't want to.
No, yes, please do. I mean, that's where we're at. Is the next step is what are steps that advisors and or clients listening can take for themselves? And where do we go from here?
before I forget, there's one particular program. If you're familiar, we talked about IRS codes for 401k and the 529. There is for business owners. There is a IRS code 127, which is a trust-funded tuition program that business owners can use. So if you're a business owner who struggles with employee attrition, wants to keep the employees around longer and longer, the implementation of a 127 program for that employer will enable them to see typically between a 3 to 4 times longer tenure for an employee, a college-bound student, than they would without that program. And it's a way for an employer. It's a cost-neutral program, effectively, if it's run correctly. It's a way for an employer to offset the cost of rehiring and retraining and re-advertising and so forth. And it uses college tuition as the bone. And if you want to learn more about that, there's a fellow by the name of Jim Northam. His program is called College Bound, and he sets these things up for businesses. But it's a great thing for advisors to be aware of, that those things exist. And it can save the business owners a lot of money, which in my translation means that if you're the advisor of a business owner, if they're saving money, you're making more money because they're investing more. So I love these win-win solutions. So that's a 120
Very interesting
college-bound program. The other thing that Todd and I introduced several years ago was this program that we call YAWA. A nice little, maybe catchy name, YAWA. You ask, we answer. Every month, Todd and I offer a live webinar for our clients, and we've begun to expand this a little bit. But every month we have a program where parents can join, advisors can join as well, and find out what parents should be doing in that particular month, depending on the age of their student. So YAWA is just an hour long, and Todd and I have created a 48-month curriculum. So for example, if you've got a sophomore in high school and it's June, we can tell you what area of college planning you should be focused on. And it's just kind of a timed program to make, eating the elephant achievable. Just something to do every single month through the 4 years, and you can catch up at any time. And then we also open the webinar up for any questions that parent participants have. The thing that we did for advisors on that program is the cost of the program is $14.99 a month for parents. And that's just a flat rate that we charge. They can cancel anytime. If an advisor wants to pay that, they can pay it and make it part of their college planning fee with a client if they want to do that. And the other thing that we do for advisors, because part of this program is we always say, for example, if we're preparing for financial aid eligibility, we try to coach the advisor on this is what you need to do in this area. Okay. And during the webinar, we'll say, you need to go back to your advisor to talk to them about this specific thing. So we point the clients back to the advisor on a monthly basis. So it's an ability for an advisor to enroll a client and know that we're going to point them back to them for specific counseling, whether that's on consideration of a accumulation tool, a conversation about, is long-term care, term insurance, or an accumulating policy right for me, those types of things. We'll send them back to the advisor. But it's, like I said, just a way to keep the advisor or keep the parent engaged. And for the advisor, we allow them to enroll a family for $99 a year. So we stay under that compliance radar.
That's perfect. That's very, very good. What we will do also for the listeners is include a summary and detail of where you can go to access information.
We'll get that to you
within the description of the episode. So we'll make sure we include that. Gentlemen, this has been extremely informative. I'm sure invaluable to many of our listeners. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Cheers. Till next time.
Yep. Thank you.
Look forward to it.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. Please subscribe, like, share, leave a comment or review. Be sure to check us out on social media at Optimized Advisor Podcast. Till next time.